for the time too, we speak about the scientist. It's like university and all that. And can you comment about the scientist in USA? What's matter? Where is because it's very new now. The scientist is very interesting about UFO. It was not the same case 20 or 30 years ago. And you can see that in USA, like Dr. Avilov, for example.
Yes. Well, of course, Jacques and his colleagues have been doing science consistently, very quietly, under the radar. But Dr. Loeb, it's interesting that this happened almost simultaneously. He had an experience with an interstellar object that he was studying that was unusual in terms of its shape, in terms of its velocity, in terms of its reflectance, and he didn't think it was a natural object. It was so strange and unusual, it led him to think that it might be an unnatural object, maybe a solar sail or something manufactured. And the fact that he's very bravely been willing to, astronomers by and large, as Jacques has pointed out, in public, like at a committee meeting or something, don't want to acknowledge an interest. Privately, many are interested. But Dr. Loeb had that experience, wrote his book, Extraterrestrial, and started the Galileo Project, which I'm involved with in supporting, trying to help them raise money and so forth. So that has added further legitimacy. He's a very effective spokesperson for the research, very high profile, also gets a lot of press. So that stirred up a big discussion in the American scientific community. And with NASA coming along also, of course, that's another green light for people in the scientific community to begin to recognize and discuss this and talk about it. And other groups are getting involved. I think a lot of young people would like to get involved. The problem is getting data for scientists to study. That's the challenge.
And the stigma has been removed. Now you can have a conversation with, if you're sitting in an airplane going somewhere and you start a conversation with your neighbor, you can talk about UFOs and they're not going to throw you out of the airplane.
I had a phone call from someone at the Pentagon. He said, we don't have to whisper when we talk about this anymore.
For us, I mean, for me, because I'm not an engineer, I don't know, I'm a citizen, I mean. And it's very wonderful to know that the world, there is a big scientist. They talk about OVNI, UFO, and all that. It was not the same thing, I mean, like 20 years ago. There is something
it was not
incredible now.
It is just starting, and I think it's not the same everywhere. I think that what is happening in the States, and I was listening, Jacques, very carefully about this movement in the US and this idea that there will be a revolution in science, and so this interest, you know, to look at what is the subject, UAPs, what is behind, what impact on physics and possible technologies and so on. And then we will come back to the technologies afterwards, because that's another subject. However, we see that in order to have or to motivate scientists, we need to have data. This is something we discussed on this web TV with Robert Powell 2 years ago. And we discussed that because talking of observable in something, talking about observable with measurements in other, it is really another subject, because scientists need to be fed with data, metadata and so on, so that they have material to work on and to elaborate new physics laws and so on. And this is something missing. I noticed that there is somewhere a database with more than 200,000 cases. That's interesting. I have just a little question. What is the percentage of these cases in terms of technical cases, so cases with information measured. I mean, not only, okay, with my family, I saw some strange objects flying above the Pacific Ocean, but yes, I saw something, and then some sensor somewhere, you know, made measurements. So we have the technical data related to the case. What is the percentage? It's 10%, 5%?
So there are two kinds of questions I'm answering under your control. The database is still classified.
Okay.
The project is not classified anymore, and the global findings have been published after review of what my colleagues had written. The database itself is still classified. You know, if it was me, I think it should be declassified because it's now 260,000 cases. That does not mean that we have all the answers, and it's also, you could, if you put some more effort into it, you could get another 100,000 cases. The number really doesn't. In the way I designed, I was in charge of that part of the study. The way I designed it was in 3 levels. The first level we've done. It's collecting, translating, and essentially establishing that database. I won't talk about the structure of it. The secret is in the structure. It's not in the data. That's a mistake that people always make about databases. You know, the secret is in the structure or in the superstructure or in the metastructure. And to get at the metastructure, you need as many cases as you can. Then you can work your way back into the physics. We have, in all those cases, we have an outstanding physical instrument, which is a human being. Okay? So we think of radar because now, in the last few years, you know, the Pentagon and the armed forces have developed extraordinary devices, both for ground level, atmosphere, and beyond the atmosphere. Of course, that's data that we know how to manage and that would give us an argument for doing more research in a particular direction. But what about the cases where you have a farmer, you know, feeding his cows, and something materializes among the cows? The cows will run away. You'll have traces on the ground, but they are not, as we've seen, they are not very convincing of anything by themselves. The farmer is going to have physiological effects. You know, fear is one of them. But he is going to see, he's going to hear. We can recover that data. We can, you know, the human body never forgets anything. The brain forgets, but the immune system never forgets an insult. So we can recover that. That's one of the directions in which we want to go at Stanford with Professor Nolan, because he's a specialist of cells. That's certainly, and I've learned that from him. Okay, so it's recent knowledge. I didn't learn that in school, but the immune system never forgets an insult, and we can recover it. Now, we couldn't 10 years ago. That's very interesting, because now we have a different way of approaching the totality of the thing. We don't know we don't know enough about the physics of the objects to know whether there is really an object there. I mean, look at virtual reality. Maybe somebody has a way of making a virtual reality that's adapted to that particular location or that particular observer and materialize it. And we're very close to that. If that was a goal in Silicon Valley, we probably could do it. So the question is, what's really important about the object? We know also that in close encounter cases, the perceptions, the object takes control of the perceptions of the human being. This is not something that's interesting necessarily to the defense industry, but it's something that's of great interest to biology, to medicine. So those are the directions where we hope we'll be able to go in the next few years, especially at Stanford. By tapping into international knowledge, international science, and that's very much what we want to do with France, with Europe, with Latin America, and maybe other countries.
I think this is a very important point, referring to the close encounter cases for the,
yes.
The effects on human being, as you are saying, and as we explained this morning during our meeting, Dr. Gaspari on our side would be very interested in exchanging views because there are different levels of impact on the body, and the body is a receiver, as you say, with a memory. So even if you don't have all the instrumentation, you are capturing information that can be analyzed later on. The vegetation as well.
Yes.
You know, what is alive is recording some effects, and you can conduct analysis. However, back to the technologies and so on, we certainly need also many measurements about what is happening, not in the near field, but in the far field, you know, in terms of, you know, what about the light, what about the kinematics and the sound and everything. This is where we need to collect data.
I think there is some good news, at least on the Defense Department side. It won't immediately help the scientific community, but the majority of the DoD cases involve multiple sensors. So it's not just the human eye, it's also radar, infrared, and sometimes other detectors, signals intelligence. The capabilities of the radars that are being deployed on all of the platforms now are vastly greater than they were 10 years ago. They're getting much greater precision. Meanwhile, the F-22, the F-35, they have very sophisticated sensors for tracking what is happening around them in space, and they've got to be getting a lot of data from that because they are having a significant number of encounters. There was an article about this the other day, and an F-35 that encountered a, quote, you know, a UAV at 35,000 feet going 500 miles an hour in restricted DoD airspace, and those kind of things are happening. So they're getting certainly a considerable amount of data. Part of the challenge is how do you get that to the scientific community, and who's analyzing it?
Yeah, we do have a number of scientists on board the GEPON board. But the main scientist who is interested in the whole thing is the psycho-sociological guy, because that is a very big amount of data that he can work on. The others, more technical, are not happy with that because none of the cases can be replicated in labs, usually. So if you cannot replicate something that has been described outside within a lab, you cannot really work on it. Now, this being said, as you pointed out, what we need is measurements, and we need to really have data. So some of them have done or started to doing this. The problem is to find the finances to put forward the networks. For example, we have one guy who was interested, he's a scientist, and he was interested in the Hessdalen lights in Scandinavia. So he worked out for a network of observing mechanisms. The problem is that he has difficulties into finding finance to do that. So it's not a simple thing to do. What we definitely need to do is exchange what we do have, exchange our finances, but also our points of observation. We need more observation.
This is directly what the Galileo project is trying to address, of course. They're deploying very sophisticated sensors. in a number of locations, and trying to get pristine data that is totally unclassified could be shared with the entire community to research. But of course, they have to get those deployed and then have incidents where they, collect the data.
Luc, could you speak about the comments on OVNI and Aero?
Yes, I can try to make some summary, and for sure Baptiste will support me and complete. What's the feeling today about the reports? From OVNI first. Well, we have now 3 reports. One was issued in January. There were new things in terms of evolution of the number of cases. If I remember, we were around 180 mid-21, okay? And then, of course, the number of cases reported in January was more than 500. Of course, among these 500s, some were explained, but at least a large part of them were without explanation, with an agreement on their specificities in terms of high velocity and, well, unexplained. Where people didn't say it's coming from somewhere else, but might be. Later on, and before the new reports, the last one, there were some interesting conference. It was at the end of May. NASA plus contribution from Aero, and they started depicting some elements about radar signature or electromagnetic radiation, kinematics not so extraordinary, okay? They didn't say, we saw an object stationary and then accelerating at Mach 10. No, but something new, trying to give, I would say, a shadow of the typology, of the features of the UAPs. Now, having said that, where are the progress? We don't know exactly. In terms of statistics, nothing new, except that roughly on the average, you have between 2 and 4 or 5% of unexplained cases. Okay, the cases that were reported and analyzed by the FAA, so the civil aviation, are more or less explained. Okay, with lights. Okay, it's long carrier aircraft. But now the unexplained cases, we can say that they have approximately about 1 or 2 cases per month. Okay, but not so much explanation. What we know is that the pilots, the military pilots, have some kind of data link. They can report now automatically what they are seeing. That's a new element, but not so much in terms of understanding of cases. They mentioned some cases. There is the sphere of Mosul, okay. Another case in Asia, but they explain, of course, it's an artifact from signal processing. So we don't see new cases emerging, not really. There are some videos provided, some we knew, and other ones which are new, but nothing really new, except that the process is ongoing, that people have the capacity to report what they are seeing, and maybe in the past it was not the case. So this is a progress. What is your feeling about that? Is my statement right, or?
I think that's a fair characterization, and I think this is progress from where we were, because people were afraid to report at all, and now someone is beginning to compile the data. It's getting centralized from the different services. They're beginning. One of the things that was frustrating for me for years was being familiar with the instruments and sensors that the community has. I've always thought the best way you could ever get real answers to this question if you could use that apparatus to start measuring and searching for these things and tracking them. They're making progress in identifying signatures, which instruments are most effective at tracking them and identifying. So I think progress is being made behind the scenes. It's frustrating for the public, it's frustrating for the scientific community not to see more of the raw data. It's frustrating for Congress too, by the way. I don't think they're getting as much data as they would like to at the present time. But it represents progress. I think there will be, I don't think we're going to go backwards on this. I think we'll have new leadership probably soon on this issue. And as the services are held accountable, if Congress keeps the pressure on, I think you'll see continued progress in that regard.
Baptiste, you wanted to have some reaction about that?
I'd like to make a point between the two last segments, between science and the report, because I think we may be missing the elephant in the room, because what is interesting in the last report is what it doesn't talk about. So in the last few months, we had whistleblower David Grush that gave sworn testimony to the US Congress, but it was also backed by Dr. Pippa Malmgren and journalist Michael Schoenberger, that both said that they met with other whistleblowers, and they all agree that the US holds crafts. And very lastly, last week, if I'm not mistaken, we have Jim Latkatsky, who was the head of AUSAP, the previous incarnation of the US UFO study program, that declared that there was a craft in possession of the US that that could be entered in. So we have scientists trying to extract data from the phenomena, and we have a portion of whistleblowers all agreeing on the same thing, that the US already have a physical craft in its possession. So I'm really wondering if there shouldn't be a decision somewhere of studying the crafts themselves, imagining that we can recover one, instead of studying the signatures we can collect from the phenomena. So that's just a point I wanted to make, because the amount of information we have from these whistleblowers, that is correlated information, because they all agree with it. They disagree on the amount of work that is being done on this craft, but they all agree that these crafts are in the US possession. And on the other side, we are scientists really trying to tackle the phenomena. And I completely agree with Pierre BESCOND. I think there is a real problem of funding this research. Even a simple scientific tool today that is really accurate costs money, and there is a real necessity of giving funds to scientists to do a proper research on it, and independent research and public research. For the report, what I really found interesting was, it's a point of detail. It's almost a question for Christopher Mellon, because earlier we talked about how the Navy was more open about UFOs than the Air Force. And in the report, we can read a switch of position, because we have the arrows commending the Air Force for its activity and saying that a relationship between all air command elements remains strong. And just a bit further, we have Arrow will work with the US Navy and MIL to ensure timely and quality reporting, noting that there was only one case of underwater anomaly that was reported by the Navy. So that was the point I found really interesting in the report, because in the previous report, it was pointed out that the Air Force was refusing to collaborate, in diplomatic words, but it was the effect. And in that report, it's the Navy that is refusing to collaborate, and they congratulate the Air Force. So I would like to have the reaction of Christopher Mellon on that point.
Well, I still have questions about the degree to which the Air Force is really cooperating and how much is getting to Aero. And I'll give you one specific example. So there was a case written up in a publication called The War Zone, The Drive, in which a UAP flew over the western United States. Commercial airline pilots saw it, FAA radar detected it, they contacted the commercial airline pilots, verified it was up there. The Air Force scrambled 2 F-15 fighters to chase this thing. They weren't able to catch it, and that case was not reported to Aero as a UAP case. You would think that would be, and I confirmed that with the government. So how much of the Air Force data is really getting to Aero? They operate the world's most powerful radars and emitters. They're all around North America, and the space fence and other incredible, very powerful sensors. I'm not aware of them reporting any cases from those sensors to Aero. They may be. I'm not in a position to know that. But it's still an open question in my mind, the degree to which the Air Force is being open and how much of what they're actually seeing is being reported to Aero. And don't forget, our classification system is fairly complicated. And some of these programs, if they're in the highest category, they can justify not sharing it and say, oh, well, nobody at Aero is cleared for this, so we don't have to send it to them. Or maybe Dr. Kirkpatrick is cleared, maybe he's not. But it's still an open question in my mind, and I think the Congress, hopefully the oversight committees will dig into that further to make sure that, in fact, there really is a open, positive relationship between the Air Force and Aero.
I think this is a very important point, and coming back to the remarks from Baptiste, I think we started by discussing the reports, okay, from Aero, from NASA, and so on. The third point is about Congress, because referring to the audits of military people, well, there were 2 fighters pilots from the Navy, if I remember, Trevor and another one, and David Grush, so he is a part of intelligence. He is not a pilot, and so on. So they brought their testimony to the Congress. Now, I never heard about any fighter pilot from the Air Force bringing his testimony to the Congress. So either there is no case, no subject, or they are under a specific rule or secret or whatever, and the Congress didn't succeed till now to bring these people to put things on the table. That's clear. And then another point that Baptiste pointed out, which is very important, is the subject related to the debris or wreckage or spacecraft. I was very surprised by what was said by Mr. Latkaski. He had an interview, and he mentioned that he saw something that could be a spacecraft, an object. He entered into the object. It reminds me your book, Trinity, you know, with the boys coming into the object. So this is something incredible, because if it's true, that's a bomb. I mean, you know, is saying that there is a spacecraft or a flying object somewhere in a warehouse, you know, very secured. That's something very big, and it's colliding the subject about the secret, and for me it's not very clear where the Congress hope to go, where they have subcommittees. I read this week that there were subcommittees meetings and so on, so people have access to classified information, but at the end of the day, it doesn't look, or they can't open their mouths because they're under the secret. So, okay, you have access to information, but you are politely asked to keep it for you. That's it. That's the rule. So, where do you think we go, or the United States is going with the Congress roadmap, okay, to try to remove this silence rule, which prevents people from speaking?
You know, there's a case like that in France. The pilot of a Mirage over Dijon in 1978 is flying along, going to land, unarmed. But, you know, a Mirage is a pretty serious aircraft. He sees a light ahead of him, a big light. He knows it's not, you know, another aircraft. The light goes like this and goes to sit on his tail, which is a kill position in combat. He gets concerned. He makes evasive action, you know, but he wasn't prepared for that, but he had to dive, and the object goes away, makes a big turn, comes back, does it again, sits on his tail. He evades it again, reports it, the light goes away, and he lands. The only reason we know about that was that there was a gendarme on the ground who saw all this. Now, the gendarme reported it through a normal channel that was not classified. And then people started asking questions, you know, I mean, what was this? And they found the pilot. The French Air Force cooperated, and that's why we know it. Without that gendarme, we would never have known about that interception. The pilot thought that, you know, this was under control. You know, it was definitely under control. It was attacking him, or making the move, you know, if it wanted to attack him. But when you computed the speed with which the object went, there could not, and the accelerations, there could not be a human being or any kind of being in it, because they would have been, you know, they would have been killed. So, and this is 78, you know, in 78, we didn't have the kind of highly sophisticated drones. Today, we would say it's a big drone. Although a drone wouldn't do that, you know, a drone would have trouble doing that, and it wouldn't do it that way. And also a drone probably wouldn't have a big light around it, you know, where you could just shoot it. So I think that that's the case in every Air Force in the world. You know, it doesn't, you get into trouble if you report something where there isn't a channel. And anyway, you know, somebody above you is going to do the analysis. And they may find that there was some thing in the atmosphere, there was some physical, you know, phenomenon, there was something else that would explain it without alerting, you know, everybody in the country. So I'm not, you know, as eager as you are to say we should report everything as soon as it happens, because it happens in every country.
Yeah, but I think that there is a difference between having a subject under secrecy, okay? You have a pilot seeing something, measuring something, he lands and he makes a report, okay, of it, and the report is stamped, okay? It's in a safe. The other guys around can have access to it, but he is not allowed to speak about that. That's one thing. There is another thing, and I had the opportunity to talk with pilots who said, well, that's what you're doing, or here, you know, that's interesting. Well, I saw once something, okay? And the guy is telling the story, so he's not under secrecy, okay? Because if he were, he won't speak. However, when you come to the question, it's not only for the military pilots. That's the same for example, Commandant Duboc, you know, with the very famous case with Air France, Airbus, you know, and the guys saw something. The problem is that they don't dare and they don't want to speak because they think that they will be annoyed, okay, maybe they take a risk and it's not worth, and the life is continuing, that's it. So the guy, the fighter pilot, continues this mission, okay, the mission was fine, so he made a report about the mission and something else, no. He didn't speak about that. And for Commandant Duboc and a co-pilot, it was the same. They landed, they mentioned to their traffic control that something was happening, they made a you know, visual sighting report. However, at the end of the day, they made the report, they signed it 3 years later, because of COMETA, by the way. Okay, so, but they were not under secrecy. That's, I think, a very important difference, because from a legal perspective, you know, the guy was signed an agreement saying, okay, I will respect the rule. He's obliged to do by the rule. You know, if it's not respecting the rule, he can have big problems. That's another story. And I'm not aware, but maybe I'm wrong, that in France, for the civil pilot or military pilot, there is no specific rule. People are cautious as they don't want to be annoyed. That's some examples with General Mignot. Remember, he was sitting there. Yeah. He explained for the case of, it was in November of 1990, and with the Transal, he was a pilot. All the crew, after landing, signed papers saying, well, we saw this, this, and this. They were not obliged to do that. They were not forbidden to do that. They did it, and we have that in the files from Japan.
Okay, we are going to go on. Yes, for the last part, STEM 3, it's very important. The question is, what's the cooperation between USA and the rest of the world, like, of course, Canada, but also with China, Russia, South of America. What kind of relation you have with scientists between USA and the rest of the world?
Scientists?
Scientists or information intelligence?
From the U.S. has very deep, close relations with the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, Australia in particular. I would say they're our closest allies. Of course, the NATO countries, we have very strong relationships and information sharing with them. And in general, on defense issues in general, this issue is more particular. This is new. I think they're still exploring. I think there have been some cases that were shared in the past, in part because, for example, when the Iran case happened with the F-4 and the radars, it was near the border of the Soviet Union. And so the first thought on the part of the CIA and DIA was, maybe it's a new Russian kind of device or something. So that would naturally go from the defense attaché into the intelligence system, get distributed, possibly with some of our allies as well. So those traditional relationships are there, and they're working, and they're strong. This is a rather new and specific issue, and I don't think it's a commonplace source of information sharing yet. I think there's probably some occasional information sharing, but I think it's on the agenda to work for the future.
Baptiste, what do you see? What do you think? Sorry, what do you think about this relation between
it's a delicate question, because by statutory requirements, ARRO was asked to talk with allies about the subject, and they did so, including a representative from NASA. I forgot its name, I'm very sorry. So we know that these briefings happened. What is very interesting is that the other countries that were involved in these international briefings deny it happened. So that's an interesting status of information when we have the US saying that, yes, we did the briefings, and the other countries denying that the briefings occurred. So that gives you an idea of the fog of war we are inside, that interrelationships between the countries regarding sharing information on UAPs. What is interesting that a few days ago, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the current Aero director, was asked the same question about international relations, and he answered that they started to talk with allies, but really don't plan to talk with rival nations about it. So I found the remark interesting because you could imagine a roundtable of the great military powers on Earth and noting a witness report and asking each other if that was a craft of somebody else like 30 years ago, and to prove that it was a UAP or not. And it's absolutely not on the table at the moment in the discussions, apparently.
I believe that one way of exchanging more or better or both would be to organize an international conference. I mean, Japon organized 2 conferences, they called Kaipon 1 and Kaipon 2. Years back, you had in the US the Pocantico conference, which was a big conference as well. And maybe we could start organizing a regular conference, inviting people from around the world, same as we started the IAF, the International Astronautical Federation, started in Paris 50 years or 70 years ago, one Congress in Paris, then the next one was organized in London, and then it happened every year. Maybe we could think of organizing such a conference international. You could be the leader, we could lead as well, we could lead together. I mean, propose that to the international community. But you would have probably first to...
I think, you know, right now, this organization is new, getting its legs under it.
Yeah.
They're still growing, they're not really mature yet. I think they've had some maybe incipient discussions, but it's still very early. When they develop a bit more and get more stable and mature, that might be very possible. It'd be a great idea.
Fair enough, yeah. Fair enough, okay.
Luc?
Well, I agree on both ideas. Well, the idea for international conference is a good idea. We started with little steps by providing some opportunity of webinar. What we did last June with SCU, SWAPS and others could be done again, and with other asked us to be invited for the next event. And there are small events because, of course, when we are thinking of association and so on, it's a matter of money, okay? However, with Eco event, they have the opportunity to gather hundreds of people, which is a good thing, and there are good routes maybe to look at what could be done. Now, another point, as you said, is that there is a process ongoing. People must find confidence, you know, to share information. And of course, it's going through channel to government, which is another arena, I would say, with other kind of data that can be put on the table. But we can maybe gather one day. We have in AAAF and in AAA, there are NDIA now, because the change of organization, you have a conference, international conference, like Missile Defense Conference, where you found, you know, people from officials, people from industry, from the research area, and they can meet together to share views and look at some data. So it might happen Sunday. Why not?
We're very disappointed about relation USA and the rest of the world. We think about a lot more information, more things, more facts in reality. So I'm very disappointed about that. I think there is more relation between politics, between scientists, between in the media and all that. And in fact, not really. It's like in Europe, in fact.
We are back. No, I would say things are different because if you look at Aero and if you look at Japan, there are different bodies. One is working with Ministry of Industry, Science and so on. The other one
we know that.
With Pentagon. Japan is publishing the reports on the debug case, different cases, and you can upload the report from the United States, you know, from France, and you get the report, you can read it. There is nothing secret inside. Now, on the US side, there is a sensitivity still now. We see that we mentioned Congress and so on. So they have to do what they have to do. That's their will to decide whether or not they withdraw classification on some information, data, and case. And for sure, at this moment, they will be able, we hope so, to deliver some interesting reports we can look at and maybe share analysis and so on. But it's under, you know, the control of their entities about classification or not of information.
There is some hopeful news in that regard. The Defense Department, the intelligence community are revising the classification guide for UAP. It should be should permit more transparency, more information sharing. They realize that they overdid it. I think right now they couldn't really justify. And I think they realized that some of the videos that appeared in the New York Times, they investigated and said they confirmed it was fine, it was unclassified. So then why are they now classifying the same kind of videos today? It doesn't make any sense. And it's not consistent with the U.S. executive order on classification. I think they realize that. So anyway, that is in process, and hopefully that will facilitate more information sharing with science and with other countries.
I'm lamenting the fact that in France, and also in the US to some extent, but it's changing in the US. It's not changing in France. A young man or a young woman who is interested in doing research cannot get a degree on studying the UFO phenomena, and the data is there. But you know, the university doesn't have a structure that would enable, you know, a professor to start a program in that area and to give PhDs or master's degrees. There have been a few that have been published. They are not very good in sociology and in psychology to some extent. They are very, very superficial. They have not been curated properly. So they are not really helping the cause of, you know, getting French science involved. Now, we're going to have 2 days of conferences at the Sorbonne. Okay? There will be I can almost guarantee there will be no professors from the Sorbonne in the audience. Okay? Why not? I mean, this is research. We know that the most advanced universities in the world, you know, Stanford, Harvard, and a few others in the United States, are opening their facilities, not just allowing a professor to write a book, but opening their facilities, and they are starting to teach in this area and to give degrees in this area. That seems to be something that would cost very little for France to do. I think that's the data is there. There are people like me and others who are available not to come teach, but to open channels to academic resources elsewhere in the US. I know who does what in Argentina. I know who does what in Brazil. I used to know who did what in Russia. I don't anymore. And, you know, and there are others like me who can bring that. I mean, they don't have to buy it. We'll give it to them. You know, this is not classified. You know, you don't have to wait for I think from the point of view of, I've of course thought on both sides of the classification issue, because as you know, I've been on both sides. I don't have a clearance anymore, so I can talk maybe a little bit more freely. The 90% of the subject is open, and people are focusing on the New York Times talking about the Defense Intelligence Agency. Why should that be of interest to a scientist who wants to study the rest? As you know, I've had a long career with ARPANET becoming the internet, becoming the web. I was there, in the small cadre of people at the beginning as a principal investigator on the ARPANET. We had machine number 2, okay? And I saw that growing. Many people were against the ARPANET at the beginning because it was military. And we kept telling them, yeah, it starts with the military because the military has the money to link these computers together. But it's not going to be classified, and commerce will use it. They said, no, it's just, just the military. Look at it now. I mean, what is the proportion of the use of the web by the Pentagon? I'm sure it's big, but it's not as big as, everything else that goes on the web. All the commercial data, the architecture of commerce, is overwhelming. It's all over the world. You can't stop it. When Turkey tries to cut it off, it reborns, itself. So why not let the people who have the information and the interest, the public information? I mean, I'm sure there is secret information that's fascinating. I've seen some of it. It is fascinating. But that doesn't mean that the solution is there. And I have come to respect the classification system, as bad as it is. There are things that probably in there should be classified. I mean, there is a legitimate need for classification, as there is in France, and other countries. And then that doesn't stop science, and I think we're going to show that.
We arrive at the end of the show. Maybe a little conclusion with our guest, Luc. Okay, but before we have a big good news, because my friend Luc DINI, you have a book.
Not here.
No, he's not here. So you write a book. Can you speak just a little about this book?
Yes, few words.
Yes, few words.
I had the idea to write a book and on the UAP subject and environment. Of course, the title is so it's UFO, if I translate, OVNI, and light on Pentagon non-classified files. And of course, it's not only on the US files and case, but it's drawing attention, and this is a big subject. We discussed that tonight together in the US. It's also looking at the different projects that were conducted. So it's a mix of the past and present with different perspectives, science, technology, research, intelligence as well, defense. And it will be available next week on the 9th of November.
Okay, well, great, Luc. Hey, the conclusion, Baptiste, you want to tell something?
Three short points to respond to what has been said. Regarding information, there are layers of secrecy to consider. So, for example, a few years back, we had former Director of National Intelligence, John Radcliffe, that said that these objects have been picked up by satellite imagery. It is public knowledge that the US has considerable resources in space for satellite imagery. But a few days ago, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, director of Aero, noted that he never saw a single picture of a UAP taken by a satellite. So there is compartmented access to some information that can be responsible for the confusion about the subject. Another point for scientific research in Europe, we have now a scientific degree at the University of Würzburg with Professor Hakan Kayal for the IFEX program inside the Space Studies course. And finally, for welcoming our guest in France, let us know that he has opened his own Substack, and you can find all the papers written by Christopher MELLON on his Substack right now.
Thank you, Baptiste. Mugon?
Yeah, a very short statement. In this country and probably in many other countries, when you spoke about UFOs, you appeared to be a weird person, especially through the media. Now that the Americans speak up on the issue, it becomes a serious issue. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
My mother was very interested in satellites in their early days, in part because I was working in that area, the early artificial satellites. So one night she was looking at the sky because I had told her that ECHO was going to be visible, from where she lived. And one of her neighbors said, "You believe in that stuff?" So, innovation in science is always like that. People laugh at you, then they say, "Yeah, but it's not going to be useful." Nobody, who needs a little balloon, aluminum balloon, in orbit? I mean, what does it do? I mean, it's stupid. And look at, the satellite industry today. So I think we're going to see something like that. It may change name in the process. It's going to be called something else. But the technical opportunity is enormous. And, living in Silicon Valley, I can tell you there are a lot of people who are looking at this. One of my friends, Federico Fagin, was the inventor of the first integrated circuit. I had that conversation with him, and he said, if we stop looking at this now, we might as well sell Silicon Valley to the Japanese. Okay, this is what we do here. We look 10 years, 20 years ago, 20 years away. That's what we need to do. We can't do this with yesterday's science. Yesterday's science says, well, it could be a meteorite, it could be a plasma. Now, explaining UFOs with plasmas is stupid from a scientific point of view. We don't understand plasmas, okay? So explain as plasma as an explanation for a UFO is really stupid. But people accept it because it sounds scientific. We need to go beyond that. We need to keep working.
Thank you, Luc. You did to say
just to react to what was said just here. In my book, there is a say from Einstein: "You don't visit a new world with an old map."
And the word of conclusion, it will be really great. And thank you very much, Christopher MELLON, to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Paris is wonderful.
It's wonderful to be in Paris.
What's your conclusion for this show?
I'll very quickly touch on a few things. The question was asked earlier, why did CIA put all this information out now and release all this stuff? Let me tell you, for the executive branch, the Freedom of Information Act requests drive people crazy, and they get more on UFOs than anything else in the world. So they want to get this out so that they don't have to answer those letters. That's part of the reason. The elephant in the room, I didn't get a chance to discuss that. I've known Dave Grush for a number of years. He's sincere, he's credible. There are many others who hold that view. I would, and there are senators who have said, including Senator Gillibrand, if this is true, they support transparency, releasing that, to letting the world know that this is true, letting the American people know this is true. Having said all that, I would say don't hold your breath. And the reason I would say that is, imagine you're the president and you brought this issue, right? Who wants to hold a press conference and say, yeah, there are aliens here, but I don't know where they're coming from and I can't protect you and I don't know what they're doing and what they're capable of? That's a very hard press conference. And no politician that I've ever met is going to likely be inclined to want to do that. The denials that you hear right now are likely to continue from the executive branch. If the Congress really wants to get to the bottom of this for certain, I think they're going to have to investigate it themselves. I was there on the Hill during the Iran-Contra affair. If they had asked the executive branch to investigate that itself, I don't think they would have gotten to the bottom line and the truth that came out. So whether they have the will to do that remains to be seen, but I don't think this issue is going to be resolved in the near future in terms of the truth of this coming out. And I think we need to proceed with everything else that we can do in terms of supporting science and supporting research in the meantime. And hopefully Congress will continue its work.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Baptiste, thank you for your participation. Of course, you are welcome for the next show. Thank you, Dr. Jacques VALLEE, to be here. Thank you, Pierre BESCOND, to be here too. Luc, wonderful. It was a very good participation for this show.
It was a real pleasure.
It's a good pleasure. And of course, a big thank you for you.
I'm honored to be here.
We're very happy to.
This is the world's leading UFO expert right here, so I'm delighted and honored to be with you folks and be with Jacques.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. It was also Dossier OVNI from Paris for a new security in English language for the second time in this show. Thank you at all. Thank you very much. Thank you to you. Have a nice night. Bye-bye.